Good afternoon. Welcome to the Mount. My name is Schuyler, and I'm the Director of Visitor Services here. And we're going to give you a little tour of our holiday house. To give you a little brief background on this house, this is the home of Edith Wharton, the famous American author, and her husband, Teddy Wharton. They built the house, and they lived here from 1902 until 1911. Now, this was built as a summer house, so she was never actually here at Christmas, but she was here deep into the fall in early November and December. As a matter of fact, I found a wonderful letter that she wrote to a friend of hers in November 18th of 1904, and she says, "We are here alone in glacial brilliant weather, the ground snow covered and mercury flitting about 0 at night, but the air is so still and bright that one has no thought of cold. I only wish we could stay on for another 2 months, but we are going to town about December 12th. Apparently her husband Teddy, he didn't stand the cold very well, so she never actually spent Christmas here. For several years now, we have asked the Lenox Garden Club to sort of do an interpretation of her style and what this house might have looked like, and also reflecting her principles. Edith Wharton loved beauty of nature, which is obvious from that quote. She loved a certain simplicity and moderation. She wrote a book that was a bestseller at the time in 1897 called The Decoration of Houses, which was her first major nonfiction work, and it is all about interior design and architecture, and her principles again were symmetry, balance, proportion, and moderation. So throughout the Garden Club interpretation of the holiday decor in this house, you'll see an emphasis on moderation, the use of natural materials, and subtle touches, which we think is really appropriate. The Garden Club had the additional challenge of not being able to use actual fir and live pine according to the local fire regulations. We only can use artificial materials in the house. If I hadn't told you that, you probably would never have known. Welcome to the entrance hall. You're right now in the entrance hall of the Mount, and this is where visitors would have arrived if they were visiting the Whartons. The Whartons were typically here, as I said, from April until late November or early December. Because this was a summer house, it is designed specifically to be very cool. It's designed actually to look like an Italian grotto, so sort of a cave-like feeling. Patterned plaster on the walls is supposed to like dripping moss or dripping water. There's terracotta tiles, which sort of mimics the floor of a cave. And the centerpiece of the room is actually this statue of the god Pan. It's a god of nature, and in the summertime he would have been a fountain. But here for our holiday decor, he is a beautiful centerpiece between these two trees. So with that, however, we're now going to go upstairs to the main floor. We no longer have Edith Wharton's furniture, but the solid pieces that are attached to the house, like that banister, are original to the house. That is a wrought iron banister made for them in Paris, custom made for this house. So now we've reached the main floor and the grand foyer, so to speak, that is not downstairs. She called it her gallery, based on Italian and French models. Very simple in form, elegant, everything is balanced, symmetry, balance, and proportion. That is what we believed in. So we're going to step over to the mirror here that is in the center of the room. It reflects out into the beauties of nature, and in the daytime anyway, also the light comes streaming in here and it reflects on the mirrors. There are several places in this house where she used the use of mirrors. One of the things when we started doing the decorations in this house is the use of books. Edith Wharton herself, obviously a great book lover, wrote over 40 books in 40 years, and we have letters and countless examples of presents, books that were given to her at Christmas by family members, and she also gave her favorite brothers books and her family members books as well. So that was a very popular gift for Wharton, so we've highlighted that in the decoration. And this is Teddy Wharton's den. Her husband was 12 to 13 years older than she was. They were married for 28 years, but it was not the most perfect of marriages. He was not an intellectual as she was. He was an athlete. They didn't have the most perfect physical relationship. They never had any children. And their interest really grew apart, particularly as she became a very famous writer. But they did love dogs. So you will see pictures of small dogs all throughout the house, and there is a pet cemetery out on the grounds where some of her favorite dogs are buried. This is a very interesting room, though. Teddy Wharton, in addition to some incompatibility sort of in interest, what really drove their marriage apart eventually was that Teddy Wharton developed what today would probably be diagnosed as bipolar disorder or manic depressive behavior. It was something that was not understood, and his increasingly irrational behavior became very difficult for Wharton to support, and this led eventually to them selling the house. Less than 10 years after they built the mound in 1911, Edith Wharton moved to France. And they got a divorce in 1913. Edith Wharton moved to France, and she lived the rest of her life in France. But this room, while they were here, was a bit of an oasis for Teddy, a place where he could have a lot of solace and a lot of privacy if he wanted to, particularly if he is in one of his darker moods. He was known to smoke quite a bit, cigars. This room would have been strewn with cigars. It had comfortable leather furniture. There would have been newspapers, the sporting news. He was, as I said, very interested in sports. And he was a bit of a drinker. So no doubt there would have been some sort of bottles in this room as well. The place that he could escape to if he didn't want to have to deal with other guests or anybody else in the room itself. He has his own bathroom. And he also has his own way out of this room, an escape hatch, if you would, through these French doors that lead out onto the terrace. So again, this room provides a lot of solace and comfort for Teddy Wharton. I think the decorations that were done this year have that feeling as well. This is a very welcoming and comforting room with all the lights. We hope Teddy would like it. Teddy actually is perhaps one of our spirits that comes and speaks to us occasionally on our ghost tours. So we really do hope Teddy likes this one. Now, we're going to go into one of my favorite rooms in the house, which is the library. So come through this door into the library. This is one of my favorite rooms in the house because these are Wharton's own books that we're looking at. Edith Wharton, as I mentioned in the other room, their marriage broke up. They sold the house in 1911. She moved to France. She took her furniture with her. She took her books with her. We don't know where her furniture is, but the books came back to us. She died in 1937 at the age of 75. She had about 5,000 volumes of books. She didn't have any children. She had 2 houses. She willed her books to these 2 different young men. Half of them, or a little less than half of them, went to a young American man named William Schuyler. And he unfortunately stored his portion of the books in London at the start of World War II, where they were bombed. But the other portion of books, which was about 2,700 volumes or so, was given to her young godson, who was a boy. He was only 6 years old, named Colin Clark. Her library stayed in the Clark family castle in Kent, England for many years, and then eventually was rediscovered and sold back to us by a British bookseller named George Ramsden in 2005. So the books behind me and in this room have been on these shelves since about 2005. They are enormous insight. They give us enormous insight into Edith Wharton's personality and to her intellect. Tells you a little bit about her Christmas traditions also. Many of these, quite a few of these books in here, either she gave to someone for Christmas or they were given to her for Christmas. And one of these is a book that she had was given to her as a child. It happened to be, the title of the book is Edgeworth's Tales and Novels, Moral Tales. And Maria Edgeworth was a Irish author who was, today you might call her a YA author. She wrote for young adults, so to speak. And you see here the beautiful end papers, the marbled end papers, and 2 of Wharton's book plates. The top one is from one of her houses in France, called Pavillon Colombe, and the bottom one is from her Newport house. But this is where the Christmas connection comes in. So you see from this inscription, it says, to Edith Newbold Jones from Papa, Christmas 1874. So this was a Christmas present from her father when she was 12 years old. And it gives you a little bit of an example of what she was reading as a fairly young girl. Amazing intellectual talent. Wharton, when she wrote her book about interior decoration, the decoration of houses that I mentioned earlier, was also very specific about libraries. She said the books should always be the centerpiece. The books should have a tapestry-like effect in a library, and nothing should take away from the effect of the books. And so the decoration that's been done this year by the Garden Club is highly complementary to the tones in this library. The gold tones of the curtains are matched in the gold of the decorations, and again, always highlighted by books, wrap books. They would have been favorite presents for her, her family, and her friends throughout her lifetime. So with that, we will now move to the next room, which is the drawing room. So welcome to the drawing room. This is the largest room in the house. You're looking now at this beautiful fireplace. This is the largest fireplace in the house. It's a piece of European marble, French most likely, imported when they built the house, probably in pieces, came across as ballast in the ship, I imagine. And then if you take a look behind the logs, you'll see an example of one of the firebacks that's in the house. These are decorative wrought iron panels that have some scene on them, either biblical or a fable or a scene from mythology. So you would have this effect of these flames sort of dancing in front of this embossed panel. Also very practical, though. They were very practical about these things. It throws heat back into the room. So as I said, even though the Whartons were not here at Christmas, they were certainly here in very cold weather. So I'm sure they would have appreciated having this fire going. We'll step over here to the tree. Now, Wharton grew up in Victorian New York, in late 19th century New York, where sort of the modern version of Christmas was invented in many ways, the modern version of Santa Claus. So she would have been very familiar with some of those traditions from her childhood. If you take a look at the tree, she has herself mentions trees, Christmas trees, in several of the letters that are published. And one of the most touching ones is actually, she was writing about Christmas in Newport 6 years before she moved into this house. And it says, "Our Christmas passed off quietly but pleasantly. We could get no one to come to us but Mr. Winthrop, but I think he really enjoyed his 3 days here, for the weather was perfect, and we bicycled morning, noon, and night. One day I did 17 miles and another 20 and a half, exclamation point. We had a little Christmas party for White's children, which enlarged itself into a modest party for the servants and their friends, which was voted a great success." And that is a letter she wrote to her governess, or now her secretary, December 27th, 1895. And that tells you a few things about Wharton. One is that her butler, Alfred White, was one of her longest serving servants, was with her almost 40 years, and there was a real personal relationship there. And she enjoyed throwing this sort of impromptu Christmas party for his children in Newport. There were some other Christmas traditions that she would have been fairly well schooled in, having grown up in late 19th century New York. One, the Christmas tree itself. Most scholars think that the sort of the practice of bringing evergreens into the house is an ancient one, goes back centuries. But in particular in the Americas and in the United States and in England, it was heavily promoted by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Albert was German. The German tradition of Christmas trees went back for a long time as well, and so he brought that tradition to England, where it quickly spread to America. So on our tree, we have put not only some ornaments that would have been typical of the day, but also some of her favorite people. So you will see pictures of some of her close friends and her husband on our tree. So we are now going to move into the dining room. The dining room is a beautiful, elegant room. It is so in the summer, and it is so at this time of year as well, and I think the decorations this year really highlight that. She never had huge dinner parties. She seemed to prefer 6 to 8 people. We only have 2 guest bedrooms in this house, so she preferred small, intimate parties. Round tables meant that you could talk to the people across the table from you. One of her traditions, even when she lived in the Riviera in the south of France, was to have a Christmas pudding. This is a traditional English style. If any of you have had plum puddings or even figgy puddings or anything like that, it's a traditional steamed English style dessert. And she would serve this on the terrace of her south of France chateau. no matter how hot it was. So a letter that she wrote in December of 1920, she says, "The garden is so divine already, and with everything sprouting after the endless rains, that I can't feel discouraged and still believe we shall eat our Christmas pudding under my new old roof." And another letter that she wrote a few years later, again from her French chateau, she seems to have gotten out of her cold New England kind of New York idea of winter Christmases, because she talks about Christmas has been a delight this year with real Riviera mildness and sunshine that we used to associate with the early winter, but no longer dare to. The house is full of violets, carnations, gladioli, and irises. So Christmas in France would have been a little different than Christmas in New England or New York, but certain traditions she kept going, like that Christmas pudding. So we are now going to go upstairs to the bedroom level. There's only 2 guest bedrooms up here. So as I said before, this is not a house for big, huge country parties, but for a smaller, more intimate group of friends. We're now going to go to the end of the hallway where Edith Wharton's private suite is. So welcome to Edith Wharton's boudoir. If visitors come here, I always ask people what they think a boudoir is, and you get a variety of answers. A place to entertain lovers, a place to get dressed, and probably all of those are true in some sense. The boudoir actually comes from a French word meaning to pout or to sulk, and so it connotes sort of a place where the lady of the house can come to get away from anybody else that's in the house, a very private place. This is what Edith Wharton did in her boudoir. She really used it as a private office. She didn't do her creative writing here, but she would entertain very close friends, like some of her literary advisors or her business advisors. Her major servants would come up here. It's quite ornately decorated, so it is a public room, but it's in a very private space. So this is how she used her boudoir. The poinsettias, you'll notice, has long been associated with Christmas. However, it wasn't until the early 20th century that a family of horticulturists in California developed the varieties and the marketing plan that has made it so wildly and incredibly popular today. On the mantle, again decorated with this lovely natural material, you have some of her favorite people. You have her great and good friend Walter Van Rensselaer, who I'm not sure if I've mentioned yet or not. Walter Van Rensselaer was her literary advisor, close intellectual friend, sparring partner. So much so that when Walter Berry died, she called him the love of all her life and requested to be buried next to him. The other 2 pictures are of her husband, Teddy Wharton, and in particular the one here with the dogs and the tweeds. As his health worsened, he seemed to be much more comfortable outside in outdoor pursuits. So we are now going to move into her bedroom, one of the most important rooms in the house. So I always say the bedroom is one of the most important rooms in the house because this is where she actually wrote. The room faces east, and she'd get the morning sun. She would lie in bed and write until about 11 o'clock in the morning. She became a very disciplined writer while in this house, and she became one of the most highly paid and prolific authors of her day. This is sort of a place of inspiration. She would not be disturbed. She shut that door. She had a telephone. She was a great believer in new technology for 1902, so she had a telephone as soon as it was available. And one of the striking features of this room is the beautiful view that she gives herself. She can see her garden. She laid out these gardens. You can see her flower garden and the view out to the distance. She would have had a great deal of help with her gardens from her niece, Beatrix Jones Farren. Beatrix Jones Farren was only 10 years younger than Edith Wharton, and they were very close friends, actually, and Beatrix Jones Farren would go on to be one of the first and foremost garden designers of her day, male or female. A formidable career and a very important career. And she was just 30 years old when Edith Wharton was building her gardens up here, so you can just imagine them sort of conferring on this and that and changing this and that and walking the property. Farren was quite a good photographer as well, and so there are some early photographs of sighting this property. So she had a big influence on her aunt, I'm sure. So with that, we are going to move to the servants' part of the house, and we'll meet you in the kitchen. So welcome to the kitchen. This is in the servants' part of the house. Now today, of course, the kitchen is the best place to be at a holiday party. It's where all the great smells are, the great aromas, it's warm. It would have been a little bit different in the Wharton day. It would have been a great place for the servants to be. But the lady of the house, they would not have come down here. It had been a very rare occasion that they would have come down to the kitchen. Now, the kitchen was hard work as well. It was very hard work. This kitchen, the cook, while the Whartons were here, was a woman named Mary Bagley. She was Irish immigrant, and she might have had maybe one or two undercooks and scullery maids, but she had to produce food here in this kitchen for the guest. And even though there's only 6 to 8 place settings around the table up there in the formal dining room, they had elaborate courses. So they had multiple courses. They had game courses and fish courses, and jelly aspects were all the rage at the time as well. So it was a very busy kitchen. Plus, they fed the servants out of this kitchen. So on the other side of that chimney over there was the servants' dining room, and there could be somewhere between 15 to 20 servants. Now, this estate produced a lot of food. It had its own kitchen garden. It had a working farm. So this would have been a very, very busy place. As I talked about upstairs, one of Wharton's favorite Christmas traditions that she kept up with even when she lived in the south of France was creating this Christmas pudding. The list of ingredients include raisins, mixed peel, sultanas, currants, almonds, glacé cherries, sugar, breadcrumb, flour, a wine glass full of brandy, eggs, apple suet, and nutmeg, mixed spice, and that would be all mixed up and steamed for hours in one of these pudding containers, steamed in or boiled in hot water. Anyway, the kitchen has all these wonderful, again, natural decorations that the Garden Club did for this year, emphasizing the connection to the natural world and the natural, sort of the simplistic, the simple materials that would have been used in any type of Christmas decorations. Of course, part of any Christmas decorations are the aromas, so cinnamon and nutmeg and mace. So this would have been a fairly nice place to be as long as you weren't the scullery maid. If you were the scullery maid, that meant you were scrubbing pots and pans all day long. So, but still, we wanted to leave you in the kitchen and hope that you all have a happy holidays and that you will come and visit the Mount if you're in the area. Thank you very much.